flip back to the very first page of your packet, it should look something like this one, where it says Original and Improvements. So, now that everyone has written instructions on how to make tea, I'm going to show you how to improve your instructions, because our learning target today was to improve our instructions in 3 different ways, at least in 3 different ways. So I'm going to do this example of another student who has already written this for me from a while ago, so you won't know them, so don't even try and guess. So I'm going to show you how I would improve it, and then I want you guys to take notes and write it along. You can see that I included a section on the right side of your paper to write those improvements. If you want a highlighter to highlight the different areas, so you can see like, oh, on the original they wrote this and Miss Draper changed it to this on this side, go ahead and grab a highlighter. But without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up on 2 different documents so that it's easier for me to write. Let's get rid of this. Alrighty, so first I'm going to look at his materials. Let's read them. 1 tea bag, 8 ounces of water, a heat source, sugar, and milk. So the first thing I noticed is that I think he did a really good job with these 2 points here, 1 tea bag and 8 ounces of water. Those are very specific amounts. He didn't do so well with sugar and milk. He didn't write how much sugar, how much milk. Remember, our goal is to, when we're writing materials and methods for science, our goal is to write it in such a way that someone can recreate the same thing over and over and over without messing up or changing. So when you write down the instructions on how to make a cup of tea, I should be able to read this instructions and make the exact same cup of tea that you guys made. So the point that there's no measurements here is saying like I'm not gonna add the same amount of sugar, the same amount of milk as you guys might have, so we need to add measurements to that. I also think when I saw a heat source, I thought that was a little too vague. So when I write materials over here, I'm going to change that into something more specific. Again, if I just get hot water out of the tap, that's going to be a different temperature than if I boil it in a pot versus if I pour water into like a big cooking dish and put it in the oven for 15 minutes. Those are all going to be different temperatures, and we're trying to recreate the same tea every single time, so we need to be very specific. So let's start with our materials. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy and paste these over here because I really like the way that they wrote them. So, a heat source. I'm going to change that to a kettle because a kettle will heat the water to the same temperature every time. Some fancy kettles will let you choose the temperature. The kettle that I have and the one that you see me use frequently only heats it to boiling, so that's completely fine as well. We'll also indicate the temperature later on in the steps. So milk and sugar, like I said, I didn't really like those, so I'm going to change that to say specific amounts. So we're going to go with 1 teaspoon of sugar and then 1 tablespoon of milk. So we should probably be a little more specific about what type of sugar and milk, because when I see these, I think, well, what kind of sugar am I adding? Am I adding brown sugar? Am I adding white sugar? Am I adding like Sweet and Low? Am I adding Splenda? So I'm going to change this to white table sugar. This is like the kind that, just like regular white granulated sugar, but that's like the specific name for it. The kind that you use when you make cookies, or if you go to a diner and you see the little packets on your table, that's this kind of cookies. And then here I'm going to write whole milk, just to be more specific. So when I'm making a cup of tea, I gotta think, is this all of the things that I would use when I'm making a cup of tea? So you guys have seen me make tea before. You guys know that I drink a lot of tea. What else do I use? I'm thinking, oh, well, I don't drink it out of the kettle, right? I put it in a mug, so I'm adding mug. And then, what else do we need? Well, we need a way to measure these things. We need a way to measure this 8 ounces of water and this sugar and this milk. So I'm going to add measuring cups and spoons. Because that will let us measure how much water and how much sugar. One interesting point I want to bring up is, do we use ounces in science? No. What do we use? What do we measure liquid in, usually in science? Right, milliliters or liters. And then what about solids? We don't usually use like tablespoons or pounds. Right, we use grams or milligrams. But since this is a recipe and not a science lab, it's fine. We'll just go ahead and go with this ounces and tablespoons and teaspoons. So I think this is pretty good for now. We can always come back and edit it later if we need to. So let's move down to methods. So let's read what our example says. Using your heating method of choice, heat your 8 ounces of water to a boil. So since I changed heat source to kettle in mine, I know I'm going to have to change that to use a kettle to heat water. I really like that this person used the word boil. I think it's super important that he used the word boil, because that lets us know exactly what temperature we're heating the water to. We know water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, so we know exactly. And then that's another concept in science writing. That's called word density or language density. So you know when you know what density is. We've talked about density before. It's when there's like the amount of stuff in the amount of space there is. So if something is very dense, there's a lot of stuff in a little bit of space. If something's not dense, then there's a little bit of stuff in a lot of space. So science, it's really important to write, when you're writing for science, it's really important to write very densely. So we want a ton of information in a little bit of space. So using words like boil, that's a lot of information in a little bit of space. We could also say heat your 8 ounces of water to 100 degrees Celsius. But just saying boil is all that information into just one word. So I'm going to go ahead and start there. I'm going to say boil your water. Again, that boil your water is all of this. Essentially, I need to add in use a kettle to boil water. That's all of the same information as over here in the example, but using way less words. Let's move on to number 2. So, put your tea bag into the boiling water, now off heat. So this now off the heat part's not important. Put your tea bag into the boiling water. So when I make tea, we talked about this mug. Where in this process is the mug going to come in? So are we going to put the tea bag into the kettle, and then once it's done brewing, are we going to pour the tea into the mug? Or are we going to put the tea bag into the mug and then put boiling water on top of it? So I prefer the second way. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to write that in a way that reflects that. So I'm going to say, put tea bag in mug. Now I'm going to go ahead and for my third step, I'm going to pour water in mug. You could add these together and make it one step. So step 2 could be put your tea bag in the mug, and then step period, and then pour water in mug, period. But saying it this way, make sure the person knows which order to do it in. Put the tea bag in mug, and then pour water into the mug. Cover, so we're at step number 3 now. Cover and let steep for 3 to 6 minutes. So I saw this 3 to 6 minutes part, and I didn't really like that. I don't like that it's so vague. It's a range, and sometimes the range works. In science, it just depends. I don't like it for this example, because if you leave a tea bag in water for 3 minutes, it's going to be a very diluted not concentrated tea, but if you leave it in for 6 minutes, that's double the amount of time. It's going to be a very concentrated tea. So those two things will result in two different types of tea and two different strengths of tea. So I'm going to give an exact amount of time since we're trying to do the tea the exact same every time. So I'm going to say we're going to steep for 4 minutes. Again, our goal is to make the same exact tea every single time. Cover, that's a personal preference. I'm not going to add it in here, but if you did it the first time, you should do it the second time. I should probably add it in, shouldn't I? So I'm going to go ahead, steep for 4 minutes. Let's change this because he did write cover, and I guess I should too. Steep for 4 minutes. Covered. I think we need to put a comma here. Alrighty. Step number 4. Add milk, sugar, and enjoy. So the enjoy part's not really important, just like the now off the heat part, not super important. So add milk and sugar. We can go ahead and put those into one step. If you want, we can put them into 2 steps, depending on if there's a specific way to add the milk or sugar. It sounds here like the person that wrote this is just dumping them into the mug, and that's fine by me. I do have a question. When are we removing the tea bag? Because if you've ever seen me make tea in class before, I never drink tea with the tea bag in it. So we need to go back and change the steps to include removing the tea bag. So let's go ahead and put it here. After we're done steeping, I'm going to say remove tea bag. And then I'm going to also write discard. This, again, is really, really dense. Remove tea bag. I could say take the tea bag out of the mug, period. Throw the tea bag away, period. But instead of doing that, I just use 3 words to say the same thing. Remove tea bag, discard. And yes, we know that we're talking about the tea bag because it's in the same step. If I were to make discard step number 6 instead, it would have to include that we're discarding the tea bag and not the tea. And then if you make, I'm looking here at number 6, when I make my tea, I don't leave it just kind of like the sugar floating around in there. I like to mix it up usually because it makes it taste way better. So I think I need to edit this and go back up here and add in a stir stick. And then down here, I'll add in stir stick. How about stir tea with, there we go. So let's go back and look at our materials. Did we hit everything? Did we use all of these? Measuring cups and spoons, we never used those. So we need to go back and go through and figure out where would we use that. What do we need to measure? We need to measure water and the milk and the sugar. So we need to add those steps in. All right, so where would we put that? So here we're going to measure the water in step number 1 here. And then I think we'll put in measuring the sugar and milk here in step number 7. But before I do that, I want to give you guys your instructions now. So go ahead and flip back to where you guys were working. So it should be on this page here was your original methods and material. And then on the second page, there will be the same page, just blank. So you can pull the worksheet apart if you want to. Go ahead and pull those 2 worksheets apart so that you can set them side by side. And I want you to go through the same steps that we just did, but for your own. And go ahead and make corrections. Remember, our goal is to change your original 3 ways today. If you can do more, great. If you have some questions, let me or the other teacher know and we can help you.